we are live, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. This is episode 144, and we have a two-time guest with us and a three-time guest, in Carlos Garrido and Noah Khrachvik. And we have a lot to discuss today. If you want to go back and check out some of our previous episodes, 54, I had Carlos on one-on-one, and then on 83, Noah and Carlos came on together, and we had some very good discussion. I know today is going to be a subsequent just a beautiful discussion. I can't wait to share this with my audience. Two people associated with the Midwestern Marx Institute. Carlos is one of the co-founders, and he's also a publisher of many books. Just a few listed here: Marxism and the Dialectical Materialist Worldview, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. And he just published a new one called Why We Need American Marxism. And I haven't had a chance to read that one. And I know that also Noah has a lot to do with his editing processes, just so you all know. So it's not just Carlos doing everything by himself. There's always a team behind there. You know, to have a good writer, you got to have a team with you. And he's also an editor of a book called, or a series called Red America, which is a journal, an internal journal within this whole umbrella term of American Communist Party, which is a newly founded party. This is going to be probably the first hour of the discussion. Is going to be about the American Communist Party because I'm curious about this. And that's their journal, Red America. And Khrachvik also has editing capabilities in Journal of American Socialist Studies. So he has a lot of different duties within the Midwestern Marx Institute. These gentlemen have been nice to share their time with me today. And I just want to welcome them back onto the show. And thanks for accepting the invitation again.
Thank you so much for having us on, Kiko. It's a pleasure. And as we were talking before we went on air, the conversations we've had, three for myself now, with you have been some of the most enjoyable and insightful. So it's very much a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, I second that. Absolutely. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And it couldn't be any other way. I could feel the respect from the first episode, and it's been like that with all my guests. I can really say that every guest I've had on, I've had a great rapport with. We keep in touch. And I just want to give a slight ad and just say thanks to all the beautiful people out there listening and watching. We've reached almost 1,400 subs. Didn't think that was ever going to happen. We're a fully monetized channel. It is a public service forum. I considered it a public service forum. And here we talk about cultural issues and political issues, a good, healthy dose of both. And we have about 42% of our audience located outside of the United States. That was always the point, to be an international community forum. And just tell your friends and family to share, subscribe, and like the content. I think that there's something here for everybody. I really believe that there's something here for everybody. If you open your mind a little bit, just don't even give me a dime. Spend a little bit of your time to expand your mind. And remember, you can't unthink free thought. So let's start with this discussion, this third discussion with these gentlemen. And my first thing would be, if we're talking to somebody like my mom, for instance, that doesn't know anything about political theory, how do you explain something like dialectical materialism? Like, how these types of terminologies, kind of going back to what we talked about in the second discussion, how do we equate these terminologies in a language to where people can have their understanding if they don't have a college degree, for instance? Because half the country has a 5th grade reading level. So how do we get those terms to resonate with people?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think that a whole lot of the people that have called themselves Marxist, a lot of them within the academy, have done a real disservice for the Marxist worldview, because I think that if we really break it down as far as the meaning of some of these terms that might seem obscure, they're almost commonsensical. For dialectical materialism, when we use that term, what we're referring to is the Marxist worldview or the Marxist philosophy, the Marxist approach to understanding the world and, postulating certain statements about how the world actually works. And it's really quite basic. It says that the world is in a constant state of flux. So nothing in the world is static. Everything is constantly changing. Things change not out of some randomness, but because within these processes that things exist in, there are these things called contradictions, which is, again, a term that could be a bit obscured. But all it means is that within entities, there's not this homogeneity, this complete uniformity. There's multiple things that are multiple aspects or opposites, as we like to use in our tradition, that are operative within entities, in processes. And those dynamics between opposing forces within things are what shape the thing's development. So at a very practical level, consider yourself as an individual. Everyone has opposing tendencies. You know, some tendencies that point one way, some tendencies that point another. And where you actually go is a product of those opposing tendencies that you contain within yourself as an individual. That means that one entity, yourself, contains opposing forces within that. So that's what we refer to as a contradiction, and that's something that most people accept. And the third most basic component is that everything in the world is interconnected to everything else. And again, you know, we have many common sense idioms to refer to this knowledge. We have, for instance, the famous example of the butterfly. You step on a butterfly and somehow something in some other corner of the world changes. And that's because, you know, the world really is in a constant state of flux. There really are things such as contradictions operative within the things that are moving, and everything is interconnected to everything else. And when we refer to dialectical materialism, what we're saying is these sorts of insights that are, in a sense, commonsensical to most people. This is how the world operates. And if we try to understand the world in a way that tries to separate things from their context, we're not going to understand it. If we try to understand the world in a way that separates things from their movements, we're not going to understand it. And if we try to understand the world in a way that says, well, when we see contradictions at play, that means that what we have before us is some sort of falsity, the absence of truth, we're also not going to be able to understand the world. So at the very bare bones of what the Marxist worldview is, it's this worldview that sees things in movements, that sees the existence of contradictions as, you know, a basic reality of that movement, and that sees everything interconnected to everything else.
Do you mind if I chime in here, Kiko?
Of course. Who are you talking about?
Cool. So I actually, this is sort of where I live, right? I work in the trades, and I'm constantly explaining these kind of things for people without college educations. I mean, and who aren't even oriented towards, you know, thinking more deeply. But they come to me with questions about, you know, politics and society, because I'm known as around the shop as the guy who knows about that stuff. So what I really do is impress upon them that the minute we see something on the very surface, right? Like we're looking at this screen right now. This screen isn't all there is to it, right? There's a whole internal sort of bits and pieces, components that make it up, right? And what Marxism is here to do is try to understand the history that leads from all of these little pieces that you know could be separate on their own towards that screen itself becoming what it is. So what we do is try to understand how things got from being at A to being at B, right? How they develop. And when we look at how they develop, that's when we get to the things that Carlos was talking about, the contradictions, right? That whatever is, you know, most general within a given thing that has to drive its development forward. That's where we begin our analysis. And then we look for the next point of necessity and the next point until we get from all these little component pieces to the whole screen.
Okay. That actually makes sense to someone like myself. I don't claim to be any sort of a label particularly, but I'm thinking of this. I could digest, I could understand that, that explanation. I appreciate those explanations. So that kind of leads into another question, and we will kind of get into the American Communist Party and like that inception and everything else. But I'm just curious, what are some of the most challenging things when you're teaching your students? Because I know both of y'all offer courses in Marxism. What have been some of the challenges in your teaching experience as far as like conceptually or whatever it may be? Or there's some things that give your students more issues than others?
You mind if I go first, Carlos? Because this is sort of my area of more like deeper theoretical work right now is digging into the problems with the way that we're taught to think in general in society, right? The way we're taught that the acquisition of knowledge happens, where we sort of, in school, we get taught to memorize things, right? We take standardized tests. We memorize dates and names in history class. And everything gets sort of reduced to these memorizations. And the way we look at new knowledge is if it confirms something we previously memorized. But what if what we previously memorized either wasn't correct or wasn't thorough enough? Then we get to this point where we have a preconception and the knowledge that's coming at us gets dismissed because it's not verifying that preconception. That's why the sort of, you get people that read in news headlines and they either gravitate towards Fox News or MSNBC, right? Because those tend to verify the things that they learned and memorized growing up. But if we take this more developmental approach to how knowledge happens, right, that I was just explaining, then the entire process becomes verifying whether those things we memorized are thorough enough or even false. And it gives us a better range. So what I try to impress upon my students is to, when they see the word dialectical, begin thinking developmental, right? And to start doing this because it's the only way that I've found that gets through to the primary problem, which is people try to read things in order to confirm those preconceptions. And we're coming out of this really dark period of our history for the working class, that is, because of the immense amount of falsification there has been regarding Marxism, regarding communism, the history and the theory. So we have to begin by attacking not even just each preconception, but the tendency we all have to try to verify those preconceptions.
Yeah, if I can add just a couple things. You know, one of the things that I mentioned in answering your first question was that what dialectical materialism is something that's common sense if you really break it down. And an example I usually provide is a boxing fight, right? No one would trust a judge that just got there on the 12th round and judged the fight on the basis of seeing just the last round. People understand, you know, on a basic common sense level that to judge the fight correctly, you need to see it as a process, how all the rounds are connected to all the other ones and how they develop into each other. And, you know, the fight is itself a contradiction. You got one ring and two opposing forces, two people throwing hands. So we understand that at a very basic level. But at the same time, as there's common sense components in people's thinking that are aligned with what is, in our opinion, a more correct way of approaching the world, there's also tendencies that are opposed to that, that push us towards thinking in the form that we call abstractly. So I know that when we use the term abstract, what comes to people's minds is sort of Plato's image of the stargazer, someone that's disconnected from practical concerns. But if you go to the etymology, the original meaning of abstract, it comes from the Latin word abstractus, which means to disconnect something from its context. And all of the institutions in the society that we live in promote a form of thinking that is abstract. They don't want us to think about things in their movement, in their process. They don't want us to think about things in how they're connected to other things. They want us to see conflict and contradiction within things as a sign of falsity, not as a sign of complexity. Because in order to think through those contradictions, we have to be able to be capable to participate in complex thinking, not in this very simplistic, shallow, superficial thinking. So the thing is that when we engage with individuals that we're trying to teach, we have to realize that we live in a society where at the same time as there's common sense kernels that that show us that they already accept a dialectical materialist worldview, there's other components in their worldviews, in their spontaneous philosophies, in the way they approach the world that push them in another direction. So the key is analyzing what are the starting points where people we're teaching are at. And how, on the basis of those starting points, can we identify the more rational kernels out of which they're thinking about the world, tease those out, and in the process of teasing those out, show how perhaps some other components of their more incoherent worldviews fall in a direct contradiction with the most rational ones. So it's all about, in terms of teaching, understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. And this is something that, if you look back at Soviet pedagogical theory, or even American pragmatist pedagogical theory, I'm a student very closely of the philosophy of John Dewey. I work in my university setting at the Center for Dewey Studies, where all of his manuscripts and unpublished manuscripts are. That's part of what I do, for a living. I edit the manuscripts that we have from his lectures in China, where he spent 3 years, both in the Deweyan pragmatist tradition and in the Marxist-Leninist tradition. In our tradition, we realize that in order to actually teach, you need to know where people are starting at. You need to appeal to their common sense. And the place that you want them to go, the thing you want them to learn, has to somehow be connected to something that they already know. And teaching has to be integrated into the practical concerns, into a web of meaningfulness that is embedded in where people are at. You can't teach people about something that, when they start learning about it, it's completely meaningless from the standpoint of the practical problems that they have in their life. You have to make the learning process something that is meaningful and connected to the practical concerns and problems that people have before them. And I think, in the sense of Marxism, this is not the hardest thing to do, because I think a whole lot of the problems that people experience in their individual lives are tied to this parasitic system that we call capitalism. And this method that we have of understanding the world is the same one we have for understanding and explaining how it is that that system manifests itself in various individual ills that people are discontented by in their lives.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating hearing you all explain this stuff, because it makes sense to me. And I still contend that it has a lot to do with something that you said, for sure. You mentioned the spontaneity of these circumstances that we live in. And we naturally have a dialectical approach. You're right about that. They're naturally contradictory elements that we're around, and we accept those contradictions. But we can easily be led astray too. That makes total sense. It does, the way you explained it. But do you feel like that that's still not a factor when it comes to someone that's educated versus not educated, or do you have to explain it a different way? Like, do you have to use analogies? Like, how do you get? Because I don't think you could tell that same thing that you just explained to someone else I knew, for instance, and I don't know if they would interpret it the same way I did.
I think a lot of it depends on your meeting someone wherever they're at, right? And being able to speak their language. The way I talk to sort of college educated liberals is different than the way I talk to, my friends and my coworkers and my family about these kind of things. Ironically, I think that the most college educated people I know have a harder time getting this stuff, and a harder time letting go of their preconceptions than most regular, uneducated working class people. I think that the education of the real world gives you a much more well-rounded view of how society is, because you're experiencing it. And when you're cut off from that larger society in a college campus, say by, sorry, Carlos, Carlos is the exception. He knows this. By being a teacher, right? And stuck within this college campus atmosphere, that can skew how you view everything. And you can sort of develop a tunnel vision just for the campus you're on. And that's a very tiny section of society, because it's kids at the end of their development out of being kids, right? It's before they really get into the workforce, before they develop into the full-fledged adults they're going to be. And so there's still a lot of dogmatic thinking, and that would be a whole discussion on how to get why that happens, but that's kind of what it is.
We have to remember, I mean, these institutions posit themselves, they purport to be centers of free thinking,
Yeah,
of
right.
critical thinking, right? The locus for where people come to search for the truth. But I think most people are not naive enough to believe that. Most people understand that they serve a function in society, and that function is to get people to think, although in various forms, in ways that align with what the ruling elite needs people to think like. So we call it education, but in a way, these institutions are institutions of miseducation. What they do is strip the almost common sense, spontaneous awareness of how the world works that Noah was talking about by adding all of these different forms of abstractions or abstract thinkings that I was mentioning that are then validated socially by the fact that the academy ends up becoming a silo, its own little world of its own. And the title provides a certain sense of hubris that closes off the humility that's necessary to realize that you don't know everything. And I'm sure we've all met our fair share of people that just because they have a title in their hand think that they know better than the worker working in a steel mill in town or something like that. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it might be the case, but our experience has been that common sense that working people have places them oftentimes a lot closer to what we consider to be the correct way of understanding the world than some of the college educated, and usually college educated liberals, because the academy are, in terms of ideological alignment, most of the time fairly liberal.
That makes sense. I know a lot of my friends are listening to this. Are you taking notes? No, just no, not to dig at people, because I think there's going to be a point where, and I even sense it just with the growth of the forum, and I know you all have sensed this. When you get bigger, you start to connect with different audiences, and then you have to learn how to engage with these different audiences. And sometimes you get surprised. I mean, a lot of times what you think happens, but sometimes if you give that contact of engagement a chance, there may be some common ground and that seed can grow some. And you see that a lot with these types of dialogues. And so I don't want to write people off. And that's why I encourage people, election night, we're going to have live coverage here on the forum, but we're not even going to be talking about the election. We're going to be talking about after the election. Like, what can we be doing between the lines 365 days a year? People are so concerned about this circus up into the 2 months leading to it. And then it's like, you don't hear about these people again. And we have to be, that things we can be doing now. We don't have to wait for these circuses to happen. Like, we can do things ourselves. Like, we need to be organizing all the time. Like, we don't really have the luxury to sit around and just wait for these people to play games on us. But I hope people are starting to wake up to the possibility that they can be active, even though it feels like that they're like in despair all the time. But I think a lot of it has to do with the mainstream media and the institutions. They've told them that this election is the most important election in your lifetime, which is bullshit. We know that is, but that's what they tell people. And I think it goes into that indoctrination that you're talking about before. It's all has to do with the way you take in the information. And liberals are going to be just as susceptible as anybody else.
Yeah, they say that every 4 years, right? The old party, before we reconstituted the Communist Party, if you look at what they were saying 30 years ago, it's basically the same speeches they give right now. This so-and-so Republican is actually secretly a fascist. So we have to engage with the Democrats because they're the worst there's ever been. And don't worry, we'll go back to being communist right after this one. I mean, at what point do you say, like, this is crazy? Why are we still listening to you? Like, the whole, what we would call the bourgeois electoral system just seems so illegitimate and not that important. I mean, no matter if Kamala Harris wins or Trump wins, our lives are going to continue getting a little bit worse every day, right? Like I'm thinking of, I mean, you could do anything other than watch live election coverage. Like, I should do like a stream saying, instead of watching the election, watch me eat 2 large pizzas in a row, because that would be more impressive than whoever wins. Like, who cares, right? They're the same thing.
That's hilarious. Okay, so
I'm not actually going to eat 2 large pizzas, by the way. That's insane.
I lied
but so
about
is watching the election. So
the ACP people, I kind of lied about the way this is going. We're gonna push it off a little bit because that's the thing I like about it, man. I come up with some questions. Sometimes I have some thoughts I want to come up with, but there's no chronology here. You know, we go with the wind sometimes, and sometimes that's the way to go. And it kind of leads into a question I have, but I have to get this one out because I'm responding to Noah. Noah posted something, I think it was earlier this week, and he said something like communism is and what it's not. So I want to know, what is communism, what is Marxism, and what is socialism? And I know that this is probably like a crash course, but like, how will you explain that to someone before we continue?
Let me just first say, everything you've ever heard, both for and against, forget it.
Really?
Forget it. It's based on some sort of distortion or falsification or lie. All of these dogmas that develop, such as communism is a classless, stateless, moneyless society. Mm-hmm. You can go through everything: Marx, Engels, Lenin, Mao, Fidel Castro. I mean, down and down the list. Not a single one of them ever wrote that phrase, right? And I'm not saying they just didn't write that phrase in that direct order. It's because what that does, when combined with the way we naturally tend to think of things in this sort of static, non-developmental, frozen in time way, is that it reduces what we call the process of communism and a new society coming about to some future utopia. That it gets it backwards. It puts this idea that we have of this classless, stateless, moneyless society first, and that we are sort of forcing reality to become this idea that we've just pulled directly out of our heads. Marx calls communism the riddle of history solved. He calls it the real movement of history, and he calls it the return to the community on a higher stage of development. And what he means by that is that there is already this process of society existing as a contradiction, as like the state becomes a thing. It arises in order to sort of try to mediate irreconcilable differences in society that are caused by the very way that society itself reproduces itself. So in capitalism, that means generalized commodity production. The center of human interaction becomes commodity exchange, and how we do that and the various forms that goes through in the development of society, right? I can kick it. I know I'm kind of rambling here, so I can kick it over to Carlos to continue, because I'm sure he knows exactly what I'm talking about, and that way you can hear from both of us.
Yeah, one of the things that Noah started his answer with was, forget about everything you've heard about communism from both people who claim to be supporters and critics. It's kind of easy to imagine why you should forget what the critics say, right? Who are the main critics? Well, the same establishment that benefits from a working population that thinks that communism, which in reality seeks to represent them, is somehow this authoritarian world order that's going to destroy everything, take people's property, et cetera, et cetera. But why the friends? Right, kill babies and babies and all these other things. But why would we ignore what the purported friends of communism or of socialism have said about it? Well, this requires an understanding of how what we call bourgeois ideology, or the ideas, the systematic ideas that defend and help to reproduce the world we live in the US, how have they developed? And in the US, during the period of the Cold War, there was a program that was promoted by individuals such as Melvin Lasky and others, that eventually culminated in the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was this institution that was designed at basically removing the Marxism out of Marxism by promoting, with billions of dollars worth of resources and institutions and journals, a form of compatible left. And that term itself, compatible left, it comes from a CIA agent named Thomas Braden, who was involved in this process. And he said, what we need is a compatible left, meaning a left that presents itself as critical of capitalism, but that condemns actually existing socialism and communism, but that participates in a thinking that is not at all Marxist in the sense that we discussed earlier in this program, but that resembles more the form of abstract thinking that the ruling institutions want us to participate in. So in our day and age, after we've seen decades of billions of dollars funneled to proliferate this compatible left, when Noah says that we must ignore everything that both the friends and enemies of Marxism have said about Marxism, it's because the friends of Marxism have themselves been enemies, created specifically by the ruling institutions to divert the attention of people who are struggling in their everyday life and seek an alternative away from actual communists who are being repressed through the Smith Act and McCarthyism, and towards the acceptable Marxists or the acceptable socialists. As far as communism, in the American context, communism has a very simple meaning that is already accepted by the American people. This might sound a bit bombastic, but the average American already accepts communism. Let me explain why. The average American accepts the conception of democracy as, in the words of Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, government of, by, and for the people. Mm-hmm. In terms of actual governance, in terms of the actual society that communists seek to create, all that it is a society where the government, the economy, the media apparatuses, the educational institution, the culture industry or entertainment industry, where all of the industries that compose a society, a form of life, operate not for the sake of enriching a small group of people who own those institutions and profit privately from them, but for the sake of enriching human life, of enriching society itself. All that communism is a society that works for society itself, where individuals are able to live in a world where the conditions are created so that they can flourish in conjunction with the community. That's what's part of the contradiction of capitalist individualism. At the same time as they posit the individual as the most holy, in a sense, they create a society where the vast majority of individuals are forced to live in misery, indebted, alienated, depressed. So communism seeks to create that society that works for society itself. And because we have this understanding of the interdependency of the social and the individual, at the same time, it'll free up individuals to be able to pursue lives that are genuinely human, to be able to flourish in their individual lives. So that's really what communism comes down to. This process whereby, by the very own contradictions that exist in class society and its culmination point in capitalist class society, those tensions cannot just stay there for eternity. You know, if you turn a pressure cooker on, it's not just going to stay there until the sun burns out. You know, it's going to pop at some point. And at some point, people are going to get tired of their existence and realize that they can run things themselves for the sake of benefiting themselves, working people, the vast majority of the American public, not just a small group of bankers and investment firms and big corporations. So that's all communism is. And if a person considers themselves attuned to the American tradition of democracy, to the values of 1776 and the most progressive values of the American experiment, there's no way they can align themselves with the communists. Maybe they don't have to call themselves communists, but they will see indeed through the work of communists that the world we want to bring about is one that they already think America, promises for them. Part of the problem that people observe in our current society is the fact that we're promised A but given B, right? We're promised government of, by, and for the people, right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all these different things. But none of us actually have that in the real world. The order that the elite have created is completely antagonistic to that. But that A that they want fulfilled, that A that they believe in, that they accept as what it means to be American and as American democracy, that's all communism is. That's how communism would be realized in America. And that's why thinkers from Marx, Engels to Lenin have said that it is in America where the most fertile soil for communism exists, because our people already accept ideals that in order for them to be realized, to be made actual, requires communism.
Let me just add one more thing onto there about the rights. And I want to come at it two ways. One, we always hear about this, like private property, abolition of private property. And people are like, oh my God, like they're going to take my house and my car and my daughter. And, they're all going to come dance with my sister and whatever else, right? Which is crazy. But I want to say that the USA was founded on promises, right? And at the time, they were understood to be promises. And that is the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And a lot of the so-called anti-communists who, if you actually examine their views, they believe in communism. They just don't understand the word. They say, well, nobody owes anyone anything. And that's correct, right? Nobody owes anyone anything just because. To think that would be kind of crazy, right? It would be the sense of entitlement that old people are always complaining about young people having, right? Another story. But if we think about the actual fulfillments of those rights, us Americans in the 21st century are born into a world where everything has been claimed, monopolized, and financialized before we're even born. The right to life is ransomed to us by giant healthcare conglomerates, big pharma, insurance conglomerates, right? The right to liberty, or the ability to find self-fulfillment, is ransomed to us by the having to sell our labor to someone else in order to get small chunks, because things were taken before we were ever born. And if we even want a shot at owning a tiny bit of liberty, then we have to do that and get someone else rich for doing nothing, just like with the right to life, right? And the pursuit of happiness, that's connected to liberty, right? You can't pursue happiness if you don't have the liberty to go about your business as you see fit. And I want to connect this to property, because it is that property and the transformation of John Locke's life, liberty, and property to Thomas Jefferson's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that begins the first step in the process of American communism, right? In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels basically say the opposite of what all the so-called anti-communists say. And I want to read a quote from them on private property and its abolition to kind of get people thinking in a new way about what they actually say. And they say, you are horrified and are intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. And these days it's more. Over 90% of the population has a zero or less than zero net worth. They continue, its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10, right? All of us being forced to pay them to get the things we need, right? You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is a non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, and that is just what we intend. So if you think about it, what we intend to do is do away with the property that removes the ability to own any property for the immense majority of society, therefore increasing the access to property for everyone, right? Fulfilling the ability to have your own life, liberty, and a real pursuit of happiness. And for us, that's American communism.
This is hilarious, not in the sense that what you're explaining, but before I came on and I was formulating some of the questions, you hit on two of them already, but I'm still going to kind of get your take on it just in your discourse there. I hear libertarians saying the same thing. I hear some libertarians, it's almost verbatim, but they swear up and down that they're anti-communist. It's hilarious to me, but it kind of leads to a question that I have. So what Carlos said earlier is interesting. I've always thought this myself. I like to be very calm and comfortable with something before I use it to describe myself. And I think that's part of the issue with the United States and probably other parts of the world is the labeling in itself. I know it's messed up our political discourse because labels have really done some damage because we focus more on the label than we do like the practicality of the matter. We don't even focus on like the practicality of it. We focus on something else. We focus on a word. And I've said this a lot of times on the history of the forum that certain areas of the country, I believe, are more conducive to communism. And if we're talking about macro level, would you agree with that statement that, or is there a geospecificity involved with this? Or there's certain parts of the country that are more conducive to communism? And on a micro level, whether it be a church or a school or a library, are there potential elements there for there to be more, I guess, a fostered environment of communism? Like, how does that work in the United States, for instance?
That's a really good question. And this is something we've thought about. I mean, there's countries that have had socialist revolutions in the century, such as Venezuela, for instance, that they don't really have to deal with a regionalized reality in their country. Their country's fairly small. The population is fairly small. Cuba, in 1959, I think the population was like 8 million people. I mean, we have cities that are bigger than that. Mm-hmm. So the reality of American socialism is going to have an understanding of the regionalized realities of our country, right? And one of the things that we realize with the question of socialism, and I think we spoke a little bit about this either in the first or second interview we did together, is that socialism in general doesn't exist. It always takes a specific form, and that form is national in character. And in a country that is as vast and regionalized as ours is, we can even say that determining also the national character is certain regional characteristics that have to be accounted for. The culture of the U.S. South is different from the culture of the Northeast of the country, which is different from the culture of the Midwest and different from the culture of the West Coast. And there's points of similarities. That's why it's, we can speak about a whole nation, but there's also unique regional differences. For us, contrary to a lot of the entities and organizations that claim to be left, that we have broken out of, those organizations thought that it's really in the coast where you find the most fertile human material for communism, right? It's in the college-educated liberals in New York, or in the college-educated liberals in Los Angeles or something, or in Chicago. That's where you find the human material that's ready to go for communism, because they think about the world in a sort of a diagram where there's right, there's left, the liberal is left, they're closer to communism, and that has nothing to do with Marxism. Mm-hmm. Our approach to winning over people is based on a class analysis. not on what people think. And so those liberals in the coast with six-figure salaries, with a college education, which we already spoke about in terms of a miseducation, I don't care if they're liberals, and in this diagram that you have developed in your head, it's closer to the ultra left that we are. That's not how the world works. The people that are closer to communist thinking are those that are the biggest benefactors, and those that Marxism was itself developed in order to understand their condition, which is working people. And the industrial base of the country is still in the Midwest. It's also in parts of the U.S. South. And honestly, in the last, since 2016, a whole chunk of that working class base was a part of the MAGA movement. And one of the things that I think was the most distinctive out of the last interview we did together was that you looked through the website of the old Communist Party, the CPUSA, and you said, oh my God, this just sounds like MSNBC liberals, you know, the fascist threat and MAGA fascists and all these different things. That's not Marxism. That's pure liberalism. Marxism holds that this is the base for communism because it's working class people discontented by the established order, discontented by the establishment, deep state, whatever they call it. And you can say, okay, wrongly, they see Trump as this sort of figure that's anti-establishment, but they're already a step ahead of most of the rest of the country that doesn't realize that there's something wrong and that they need to act. So what we have found in our personal experience, organizing in the Midwest, organizing in parts of the U.S. South, organizing in the rural areas in the coastal regions, is that these people, a lot of them who identify with Trump, some of them are apolitical, some of them liked Bernie, actually. Mm-hmm. That's the base for socialism, not the cosmopolitan coastal elites. It's the deep America, the American people, not these sections of the country that look indistinguishable from any other capital of any other country. You go to London and you find the same cats you see in New York. Mm-hmm. You go to whatever other major capital of the West, and it's the same type of people. The people that are the most uniquely American, rural communities, the Midwest, that's the base out of which communism is going to develop, because that's the organic, spontaneous working class that we have here in the country.
Can I add something about the so-called left and right?
Of course you can.
The way we're taught to think about these is, in the Marxist view, not properly reflective of reality. The way we're taught to think of a leftist is they have this view, that view, etc. The same on with rightists from a different perspective. But for Marxism, we view what is left and right in terms of what develops society, right? And the terms come from the French Revolution, right? Literally, the people sitting on the left side of the auditorium in their governing body, I forget what it was called, some French word, right? I don't speak French. I'm American. Whatever. I don't eat baguettes. I don't wear berets, etc. But I'm sorry. I can't resist stupid jokes. Or picking on the French. But I lost my... Okay, so the people sitting on the left side of the auditorium were those interested in moving past the monarchy, right, to a republic, to socialism. And the people sitting on the right were the people who wanted to stay or go backwards. And they were having a reaction to the process of the revolution. They were the right wing and the reactionaries, right? That's where these terms develop, the progressives and the left and the reactionaries and the right. And so when we look at that and we apply that to the US of today, they have to be general categories. They can't be these particular descriptions of things based on characteristics that we freeze in time again. And what I see is that the Trump movement is far more left-wing than every single, hammer and sickle in their social media profiles liberal that what they do is use Marx's name to say the same thing that the ruling class says, right? And this is the problem with the fake, or what I call the fake left. The journal that you mentioned at the beginning, Journal of American Socialist Studies, that's the paper that I wrote for that. It's called Against the Fake Left. Because for a long time, this is all we had in the US, were these people who knew nothing about Marxism yet lied to us and told us they did, doing the work of the ruling class from their class position in the middle class, right? Looking down on the entire working class, who of course rejected them. Of course they did, because they were being spat down upon, called racist and homophobic and bigoted, and they make up a new one every single day. Even when now sometimes it's true, an individual could have some bigoted view, but that's not their defining element. That what creates what they are in a political manner in regards to society. What really matters is that class position, right? So, I don't know. Go ahead. I'm going to get off on a whole big rant if I keep going, and I don't want to disrespect your time.
No, this is our time. You know what I mean? That's why I invited you all on here. No, this is really what I knew it was going to be this good. I mean, it always is. When I'm watching you guys do your thing, I'm learning, from afar, like I was saying you off camera. And I just think that people need to be a little bit more receptive. I mean, that's not asking a lot, but everything you're saying rings true with the political discourse, with just the reductive elements of progressive and reactive, and that's going back to 1788, 1789, and it like people are still kind of stuck in this left right. I mean, it's honestly ridiculous at this point, and I think a lot of it is just the reaffirmation of one's views, and once they get reaffirmed so much, they just get so accustomed to them. To me, that has to be because these are really good people, man. I just think a lot of it is people love the confirmation bias. And once that confirmation bias is attached to hierarchy, it becomes even more dangerous, whether it's a university, whether it's a pastor. And we see all these tangible examples because they want to gravitate. Oh my gosh, this person's the leader. This pastor, you go to the black church, everyone listens to what the pastor's saying. This person is a leader of authority. This is an authoritative figure. And people are just so used to that. But that takes the power from everyone else. Like, we have to see information as that's our information. No, not one person holds the information. So why are we doing that? Like, okay, we got to copy this person, copy that person. That person doesn't have any sort of authority over your thought process. You're allowing them to have that authority over your process. And I just, maybe that's just too simple for people to, I don't know. It's pretty frustrating the times we live in. And you think we would have learned from now the dangers of binaries, but it seems like we're more polarized than ever now.
Let me just say real quick. I'm sorry, Carlos. I know I'm stepping on you. I'll be quick. I promise. Yes, that is the case. But if you remember what we were talking about in the beginning, what drives progress? It's a necessity. There's something about society as it is that cannot go on in the old way. And we have a new, real left-wing movement in this country now. And it's not just the American Communist Party, but I like to think this is a large focal center of it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned something there, Kiko, which is interesting. The way that people just blindly follow the authority that they're connected to in whatever specific community they're in, whether it's the university or the church. Thinking is scary. Thinking, being a free thinker, thinking on your own, which is profoundly human. It's what genuine thinking is about, because if not, you're just memorizing or appealing to authority. But genuine thinking is scary. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant, in one of his most provocative articles and insightful ones, he asked, what is enlightenment? And he says a motto from Latin, sapere aude, which means dare to know. Dare to autonomously think on your own, and not just let the thoughts that you have in your head be the product of someone else's thinking. Think freely, think on your own, dare to do that. And that's that's scary for some people. And the paradox is we're taught that what communists want is people to think uniformly and to be the complete opposite of free thinkers, right? But it's actually, as most of anti-communist propaganda, it's actually the opposite. Our hope is that people can actually think freely. The Ministry of Education in the Soviet Union that was headed by Anatoly Lunacharsky, it was labeled the Ministry of Enlightenment because of how in line with that conception of enlightenment the communists have always been. I just had to give a speech at our party's national convention 2 weekends ago. The central essence of my speech as the Secretary of Education of the party is not, hey, you guys have to remember all of the readings and everything Marx and Engels said and everything that I sent you to. No, it was the core, the locus of what it means to be a Marxist-Leninist for us is the ability to think freely and critically and creatively. When you have a new problem that presents itself to you, don't be going back to see what Marx wrote in a completely different context and see how you can foist it onto this new problem. No, think about the problem at hand creatively and freely. So, in a way, and this might seem, contradictory with everything American people have heard about communism, but what we want the American people to do is to be able to rise up out of the dogmatisms that various forces in our society impose on them and to think on their own. We don't want to force anyone to think a specific way. We want them to think freely. And we believe that on the basis of thinking freely, they'll see that communism is common sense.
And something you all said too about this, I understand the proximity with the MAGA people. Like I've said this a lot of times on different episodes, and people they think it's just some kind of an unfounded theory that I have, but I see it in everyday life. It's not, I just don't think people are around those people enough to really understand and judge it correctly. They automatically, and you see it on X all the time. X, honestly, I don't know how much social media is going to be detrimental to people's causes in the future, but X is so toxic because you would see people on there say, you far left people are just like the far right people. You guys are just like the fascists. And like they compare the two together. Like you see it all the time. Oh my gosh, you sound just like them. Like, and is that the only like go-to that people have? Like it's got to be more complicated than that. It can't just be, oh, they're really this when you pull the blanket off of their face.
Do you want to hear something crazy? Half of the posts that I make or the Institute makes or whatever, the comments are literally like people who consider themselves leftists, like liberals basically, and then neo-Nazis arguing over why we're bad. Right? We're too brown or we're too white or whatever it is. It's the craziest thing. We've seen this alignment of forces because of that toxicity and the need to turn one thing into something other in order to sort of posit yourself as somehow superior to it. We've seen the literal neo-Nazis and liberals teaming up once again against the communists. And this is sort of the way it always plays out. Mm-hmm. This is just a new form it's playing out in the social media era. Look, it's like, I was saying this the other day, and I jokingly, Carlos hates that I do this, but I jokingly refer to them as wizards. Right? Yeah, because they believe that by uttering these magic words, they can change what reality is, right? Casting magic spells at us. I make a whole joke out of it. It's very dumb. Like I said earlier, I have a very stupid sense of humor, but it's what they do. You could say, Kiko, I love dogs. And you know, if this were X, you'd be writing a 10-post thread about how you can't believe how much I hate cats and how I'm evil for hating cats. When all I said was I love dogs.
Well, now in this social media climate, hell, they'll find a way to associate you with Trump with the cats and the dogs.
Like, well, Trump has a dog. How are you? Believe me, I know, brother.
And the thing is that, I mean, if we think a little bit critically about this, because You know, X has allowed a lot of, you know, quite scary voices to come back in to public discourse. People like Nick Fuentes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't say this as a, you know, some leftist Twitter head or something, but that guy is racist. He is anti-Semitic, and he's the biggest gift we can give to the Zionist entity today. Because the way the Zionist entity legitimates his genocide is, oh, everything is anti-Semitic. Everyone who opposes us is anti-Semitic. So you prop up a voice that is actually anti-Semitic, and you make it one of the, you try to make it one of the faces of anti-Zionism. It feeds into what the Zionist entity needs, which is anti-Semites. But one of the things that we have been focused on ever since these people came back in, because we understand how in periods of crisis, it's very easy to find some pariah group that people blame instead of the system. We've been focusing on attacking these people, on challenging them, on waging the battle of ideas against them, on, you know, asking them to debate us. Some of them have been very scared. Nick Fuentes has, you know, regardless of how many times we've asked him to debate, he's never wanted to debate any of us. He says we're not big enough in terms of followers. Some of us have 100,000 followers. Some of us have 300,000. That's not big enough, and it's the same size as you. Whatever. But the point is, we've been attacking these people, waging the fight against the actual fascists, people who actually like Hitler. And what have the leftists been doing? Because we're attacking them, they're calling us fascists. They're saying that we are platforming them or any other stupid term that they come up with. So in the same places we will be attacking the fascists. Here come the leftists to call us fascists. Just the other day, we had a comrade in Carbondale, a part of the Illinois chapter of the American Communist Party, someone who spent the last 2 months handing out preventative medical supplies for an area that was affected by Lyme disease. Because a lot of the people in that area like going hiking, and there's a bunch of ticks in the park. I myself have gotten some of them, and because it's where I lived for like 4 or 5 years. And this kid that's, you know, it's literally doing the Lord's work, preventing people from getting sick, gets approached by a 6'6" trans individual named Cassandra, who harasses him in their local Casey's, and who says that hat that you have on your head that says ACP is basically a swastika hat.
Oh, wow.
So the party that has actually had the, excuse my French, the cojones to go ahead and attack the Nazis head on, because the leftists don't even want to participate in the fight. Now we're the ones that are the Nazis in the eyes of these people. It's completely delusional. So what we see is precisely that alignment that Noah mentioned. That's the real horseshoe theory. It's the liberals that call everyone a fascist and the actual fascists. When they're united in attacking the people that are communist and serving their communities and fighting against imperialism and trying to unite the American people around important bread and butter issues, they're fascists as well, as much as the explicit fascists, because they're doing their work. Who historically, whether it's in Germany or in Italy, who historically, during the periods of capitalist crisis, such as the one that we are in today, were the stormtroopers, the extra legal organized bodies that would attack communists and threaten them and threaten to kill them? It was the fascists. But today, the people doing that are, yes, the explicit fascists and also the leftists.
Mm-hmm. You have the so-called leftists for sure. And this conversation has definitely been enriching, and we're going to keep going. And something that you all mentioned before, the adjacent nature of ACP, I think Noah made the comment about the other organizations and parties already here, which leads to my question. So you have the American Communist Party. You all founded that, right, with a bunch of other people. I want to get to that in a second. But you mentioned Communist Party USA. Is there no Communist Party USA anymore? And I'm thinking, too, we have the Green Party, PSL, Party of Socialism and Liberation, PFP, Peace and Freedom Party. You have all these left-leaning or left, so-called left parties. Why not build an infrastructure from within them? What made you all go into the decision, like, we got to create the American Communist Party?
Well, let me get to the old Communist Party in a minute. All of these groups that have been around for a few decades are the ones that have been attacking us nonstop. Before we even formed the party, the Institute reached out to every single one of them. Let's do something together. We have this huge following, like, come on our platform, like, tell us what organizing you're doing, etc. They spit at us. And there's only so many times that can happen until it begins to get suspicious, right? They have had decades upon decades upon decades to do something that matters, to actually change a single thing, and they seem either incapable or unwilling to do that. When George Floyd was murdered by the state, we had the largest protest demonstrations in all of American history. All of these groups combined could not get a single thing changed.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that means they are a failure. We need something new. Our idea originally was, well, what was the vehicle for change back when that happened? It was the Communist Party, the party that was historically connected to the entire world communist movement, right? The Communist Party of America, of the USA, the party of Henry Winston, the party of William Z. Foster and W.E.B. Du Bois, and these heroic figures of stature of Claudia Jones, Anna Strong, right? So we go to this and we find out that it's just as bad, if not worse, filled with middle-class liberals that have no idea what Marxism is. But still we stayed. We said, no, we need to respect this historical organization. Let's try. We were one by one blackballed, smear campaigns, lie campaigns, the entire leadership that's saying the same thing they were saying 40 years ago about the Republicans being a fascist threat and this being the most important election of our lifetime, right? Literally obsessed about a media collective for months and went through their ranks, isolating people, creating a sort of paralyzing atmosphere where you couldn't even tell people you were actually a Marxist. You had to say the correct woke magic words and be a wizard, right? Change reality with them. And then you were okay. The minute you go into Marxist analysis of anything, that was a giveaway that you could be, some secret infrared infiltrator. This culminates at their last convention, and now is where I'll get to the old party. During their last convention, the what we call them in Marxism is renegades. People who say they support Marxism, who are in some historical organization, but betray the working class on behalf of the ruling class. The renegades in leadership, specifically a man named Joe Sims, forced through a resolution that would actively force the members of the party to do everything they can, spend all their time and energy and money getting Democrats elected at a time when Democrats are responsible for a genocide. This caused a huge explosion of pushback within the party, as you could expect.
No, if I could add there just real quick.
Yeah.
That the operational methodology of communist parties is something called democratic centralism, right? Which in essence means that before you make a decision, you have a process of democratic consultation and debate, and whichever side wins out and gets the majority, everyone, even the people that were initially against it, have to unite. There has to be unity of action. Because we realize that in unity there is strength, but we need the democratic component. We need to be able to have that consultation. For the Communist Party USA, that convention is the main area where the democratic consultation is supposed to take place. That's where chapters from around the country send their guy, their delegate, in order to put forth the perspective of that chapter and debate. And there was one resolution that was the only one that was even worth debating, because all the other ones everyone agreed on. It was very basic stuff. But that one resolution 5 on whether they were going to continue supporting the Democrats, they had a vote on it. Before that vote, there was supposed to be an area of debate. 50 people signed up to debate against that resolution. None of them were allowed. The 5 people that were allowed to debate were people that were handpicked by the leadership and who were in favor of the resolution. So that was a violation. Then there's a vote, and the vote is oral. So it's yay or nay. The yays completely outweighed, and we have evidence. We talked to all of the delegates that were there. They completely outweighed the nays. But what did leadership do? We can't tell which one won. So what did the cadre do? The people said, okay, if you can't tell through yay or nay, let's actually vote so you can count the votes. They said no, which was another violation, because when someone requests that constitutionally, they're supposed to accept it. So what ends up happening when the leadership calls it a tie, it ends up going to a body that is fully controlled by the leadership, where the decision is made basically by the proxies of the leadership who want to continue supporting the Democrats. And eventually that body voted in favor of the resolution and of continuing to support the Democrats.
Imagine
what ended
that.
up happening is that all of the cadres, all of the delegates that were there that were cheated of the one chance that they had to have some actual democracy in the party, which is constitutionally required, some of them ended up passing around a petition where they said, okay, maybe let's be good faith about it. Maybe there wasn't time to discuss, but let's discuss now, and then let's do it. Let's create a forum to discuss this question, and let's actually vote on it in a serious democratic manner. Do you know what happened to the people that made the petition and the hundreds of cadres and even whole chapters that signed on to it? They were purged. They were kicked out of the party for asking that the party live up to what the party said it's supposed to be doing. So on that basis, on that breach of democratic centralism and of the party constitution, we realize that, okay, it's one thing being a party that says it's communist but not actually communist, and you fight within it, and if there's the procedures that they claim to be in place, you can actually change it at some point. But once the procedures themselves have been nullified because constitutions have been violated and democratic centralism has been violated, there's nothing left in the party. So the people that participated, the democratic base, the grassroots of the party that were cheated in that 32nd National Convention, they're the ones that now reconstitute the party, because they are the party, as the American Communist Party.
It includes
ACP. And it includes this other party that existed, which was the Party of Communists, that left in the 90s for similar reasons. 80% of that party, the day we launched, quits and joins our party. And that's basically what the American Communist Party is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to say we, as in Carlos, Eddie, me, Haas, Jackson, the plenary committee for the new party, the reconstitution of the same Communist Party, we simply happened to be in a position where all of these people trusted us to bring them together and bring that legitimate infrastructure of the old party that we say is liquidated and gone with them, right? And reorganize it, put it into a new form, but it continues the same mission as the old party on a sort of higher stage of development, to use a Marxist jargon, you know?
Thanks for clearing that up. That makes total sense.
We actually, I'm sorry. I have a bad habit of interrupting. We wrote a declaration about this process. So that's on our website if you ever want to read it. I think it really gives all the details of how that happens.
No, I'm definitely going to link all the information in the episode description. And that does make sense, because I'm not going to throw too many people under the bus on this channel. Like, at least I want to say that I've been pretty ethical and honest up until this point, because some people were coming up to me. I'm not even going to lie. It was about 8 months ago, and I was talking to a woman in the coffee shop, and she said, "You know, you're a journalist, right, Kiko?" Because she saw me in the coffee shop. I just didn't know who this person was. And she said, you're a teacher, aren't you? I was like, yeah, how do you know that? She's like, I can tell. And so we got to talking, And I told her, yeah, like I'm a professor, like I've taught on and off, do some freelance work now. And she said that it's just something about the way you were, explaining the things to people, and I could kind of grab onto that, and I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but it has something to do with what we've discussed as far as the parties. So this is where it goes to. It goes to the parties, the reluctance of some people to kind of meet you halfway. And I know you all have had that issue. You just explained that you've had that issue with people trying to meet you halfway, but then they proclaim to be something else. And that's another thing that I've had to learn in this media landscape is the people that you think that they aren't what they always seem. When you actually meet them, and it's
Yeah,
not really it's not throwing people under the bus. It kind of caught me by surprise, and it's unfortunate too because it kind of goes back to like television again. What you see on television isn't always it's a simulation. It's a simulation of something, and this is almost becoming that in ways. And there are authentic voices there. I don't want to say that, but there is definitely a propensity to have this simulation world within this world that we're trying to navigate through because I honestly believe that some people are just in it to make the money. They're not in it to push any movement, organization. They're not trying to mobilize people and get things done. They're not trying to do that. They're in. This is like a business venture for them. That's what it is.
Let me tell you something about the old party. They are sitting on top of millions upon millions of dollars of real estate. They also, at this last convention, failed to give a financial statement, which is another thing in their constitution. And so I can't, make any claims, but it seems to me that Joe Sims flying first class around the country might be, while they're, crying poor mouth and getting donations from their members and their rank and file just to keep the website that they call the paper going. I don't know. A little suspicious to me. But look, I think that Carlos tells me this all the time, that I expect people to be better than they are. I try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I treat them the way I would assume I would act, right? And I'm constantly disappointed what the milieu we're coming out of, this middle class sort of really sleazy quote unquote left, people will do anything to take you down once you do not, kiss the ring or, mouth the right magic connotation or whatever, right? And that's what we've experienced with them since then. We used to stay quiet about it. But at the end of the day, look, we're peaceful people like any communist. But we're at the point where they brought this fight to our door, and so we're going to finish it.
I want to just add a joke there in terms of the interaction, the sort of people that we're forced to interact with in the left. This joke comes from someone who I've criticized a whole lot in my work, but who nonetheless has some rational kernels, Slavoj Žižek, which I know Noah's going to be pissed at me citing him. But he has this joke where this genie goes to the Balkans and he asks, he tells a guy, hey, you can ask me to do whatever for you, I'll do it. But the catch is I'll do it twice to your neighborhood. So whatever I do for you, your neighbor gets twice as much. And what the guy says is, okay, take off one of my eyes. So the point is not, to have a positive good for oneself, but to have a negative for the other. And that's how the left operates. And the Twitter left, the so-called left, they don't want something good or productive to be done by them. They just want to see everyone else sink. And, that mentality only gets you so far. I mean, it'll work for the silo of people that are in that very sad, resentful state. But for the general population who actually have real concerns about their life and who need, the bread and butter concerns in that life addressed, it's not going to work for them.
I wonder how much of it is because, I mean, we went over this already, right? That they failed. If the actual improvement of living conditions is their goal, they failed. And so the American Communist Party is reconstituted, and suddenly we're succeeding where they've tried for decades and done nothing. I wonder how much of it is based on that needing to try to delegitimize us, because they're sort of in this stage where their failure makes themselves, even if they don't want to look at it like that, look at themselves like professional amateurs, right? Or proverbial amateurs, rather.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's definitely something that's always in my mind. And I know that once this forum continues to grow, the thing about us, we honestly don't give a damn who we encounter, because I've reached out to I reach out to anybody. It doesn't matter to me at this point. You have nothing to lose reaching out to people. People ask me why do I reach out to people like Trump and RFK, and I'm like, you don't know what I have to ask them, first of all. And it's just like there's always a reason why I bring people on. It's not just simply, oh, I'm going to look through my black book and choose these people. I mean, there's also a reason that I have these people on the show. And I think that's part of the mystique of the show, is that you never know who's going to be on the show, but there is a purpose behind it. And the purpose is honestly, like, ultimately we need to find a way to organize and do things together. And I believe that we can do things together. I know we will. It's just a matter of getting people. I have to be able to optimize that crowd. I can't just say those people aren't willing to get on the train, because I won't know until I at least ask those people. And some people, and this is a stage. Some people, I know the stage I was at when I was 18 years old. Like, my dad is my largest political influence. When I was an 18-year-old liberal, I was pretty open-minded as an 18-year-old, but I had so much to grow. Like, I knew then, I know there's way more to the world than what there is in front of me right now. And now, being 42 years old, I've understood that. But when I'm 50, there's going to be even more room to grow. And I just think people sometimes don't give themselves room to grow. They just automatically, I don't know why they box themselves in like that, but they do. And I see it all the time. And like you said, this Twitter left or whatever it is, that's why I'm very particular about who I invite on the show, because I don't know if people are trying to sabotage movements or what, but it's just, I feel like at some point, like, there has to be some kind of sabotage element involved, because you have to know that you're pissing people off when you do that kind of stuff, like on these social media platforms.
Kiko, remember when we said earlier that dialectical thinking is just common sense? That's it. That's you talking about your life and constant growth, and that's dialectical thinking, by the way. But look, I did recently, a few months ago, an article of self-critique, because we've been at this as an institute for 5 years. We've seen a lot of growth and good numbers, but I think one of the most valuable things for an organization or for an individual is being able to look back and see, where was I wrong, and how can I even publicize it so that others who might be in that path can learn from my experience. We came into the scene with the thought that, okay, we're looking at these different organizations on the left. We're looking at what they say about themselves. And on that basis, we see that there's more commonality than difference. And our goal is almost to bring all of these different lefts together. And I have articles explicitly saying, like, why doesn't PSL and the CPUSA and the FRSO and all these different organizations, if they have 9/10 in common and 1/10 in difference, why don't they come together? And as Noah mentioned, we extended our fraternal hands to all of these organizations for years. And if the hand was ever not shaken, it's because the one that rejected was the other one, not ours. So that forces me to think, well, if people in these spaces, some of them are very good people, but if at least the leadership, the ones in charge of the trajectory and the structures of these organizations, if they're of the nature that whenever there's an attempt at unity, they're the ones that bring forth the cancel culture and the smearing and the talking behind people's backs. Is that the sort of unity we should be seeking? You know, what happens when you unite fire with water? Is it good for the fire? Is it good for the water? No, it just dissipates both. And what we ended up finding was that in this attempt to search for some sort of pan-leftist unity, what it leads is futility. It's just this sort of cancel culture that is, it's the reason in part why there hasn't been any successful leftist movement in decades and decades in the US. So we have to even interrogate. We know the ruling class seeks to divide because they control through dividing. Divide et impera. It's famous old dictum that all the powerful have understood very well. And when they've lost, it's because they forgot this dictum. But the unity that we have to counter that with, we also have to critically interrogate. Because we don't want unity between fire and water because it dissipates the fire of the struggle that we're involved in. The unity that we must search for is unity of the people. Because those are the ones that make history. Not various different political factions. It's the people that are getting involved that make history. So I did an article recently called The Dialectics of Unity in the Left, where I said, I was wrong. We were wrong. And this is what experience has taught us. And the focus on unity that we have now is a unity based in the people, not in these various different lefts that at the end of the day, by promoting unity with them, you're actually promoting de facto more disunity, more division.
Okay.
I think just to add on to that really quick, look, the fake left abandoned the working class, not the other way around. And we see through understanding Marxism and even just our own lives that these fake leftists aren't a revolutionary agent. The revolution doesn't happen when we can get everyone to agree to, tiptoe around everyone's microaggressions and points of privilege, and everyone has to check their privilege and do whatever. That's not when revolution happens. Revolution happens when the working class is unable to live in the old way and is forced into motion. And in order to do that, it has to become conscious of what it is and fight in its own interest. And so we say that there is a new left, and it's the reconstituted Communist Party. It's the American Communist Party. And it's not just us, there are others, right? But the goal isn't to unite with all of these decaying old elements of the pre-2020s. It's to unite with the working people of this country that need change.
I like that. And in this same vein, I tell you, this conversation is going a lot longer than I thought. I can tell because we've covered so much stuff and there's a lot more to cover. And I'm thinking about this word capitalism. So that comes from Marxism, right? That word is from Marx and Engels, correct?
Unless you talk to a libertarian and then it's like ahistorical and the caveman did it. And,
It's in the work of, for instance, someone like Adam Smith. You don't see capitalism. You see even the term capitalist wasn't employed there. It was like industrialist or even master, because he was already connecting the capitalist master in a sense to like the slave master. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the popularization of the term comes from the Marxists, basically.
It comes from Marx's theory of what capital is, basically.
So is that the reason why in popular culture the term isn't used for people that are capitalists? They don't refer to themselves that way, because if you notice, whenever there's a smear, it's always you're radical, you're far left, you're a Marxist, you're a communist, you're a socialist, but you never hear people say that they're capitalists themselves. Is there a reason for that, even though it's part of the same lexicon?
I do see some people say it's such like political pundits or some libertarians where they're like, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, even though I'm a capitalist. And
really?
They think of capitalism as an identification with the system. In reality, like all that capitalism really is capitalism. It's a society where the most supreme value, what matters the most, the whole purpose of everything else ends up being englobed in this one purpose of capital accumulation. Because capital itself, capital is not this cup or some money in my pocket. Money can turn into capital. Everything can potentially turn into capital. Because capital is a relation of accumulation. That's what capital is. So when you talk about a system based on that, you have capitalism. And it's a system where the whole purpose of everything is how can we accumulate more and more capital? Not how can we create better conditions for people, not how can we even allow the rich to be very greedy people and have as much possible in their savings as possible. Because that's not capital. If you just got money in your savings, if you just have a load of cash in a room, that's not capital. That's money, but it's not capital because it's not being used for accumulation. So, I'm forgetting what the original question was, but what capitalism is not having markets, as people often von Mises says, you either have a socialist society or markets. No, there's been markets in slave societies and feudal societies and socialist societies. Markets are just an institutional form that decide how we distribute things, but how we distribute things is based on how we produce them and the purpose for how we're producing. So yes, there's capitalist markets, but that's not what makes capitalism capitalism. What makes capitalism capitalism is not the ideas of specific sectors of society, but it's this real movement, this real trajectory of what is it that's going to govern the movement of society, the accumulation of capital or something else. As soon as you have something else, you can't be talking about capitalism. You're talking about something completely distinctive. When another value that's not the accumulation of capital is put to the forefront, you don't have capitalism. You have something else.
And this is, I appreciate the explanation, by the way. That makes a lot of sense. And that's the reason why I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole of, we understand why the terminology is used the way it is in this, the circus right now. I mean, it's ridiculous. The way they brainwash the country. Kamala Harris is a leftist. She's a communist. And I actually posed a question on Facebook today to my people that follow me and said, to Harris supporters, give me 5 reasons why you support Harris without mentioning Trump, fascism, Hitler, anything. And I said the same thing to Trump supporters. Give me 5 reasons why you support him without mentioning communism, far left, any of that. I've gotten 2 responses so far. And guess what? They're both in my family. One sent a DM and one was, and they were both black, obviously. There's something going on with that too. Even with that, the way people preserve their beliefs. And I'm saying to myself, why are you hiding this shit when people are confronting you directly about it? But you can put shit on here on your Facebook, Harris and Waltz. You can put that shit on there all day. You only have one choice. Like all my fucking liberal friends are putting that shit on their profiles. You only have one choice. Like make sure you're smart. But you can't participate in a fucking poll. I mean, like I'm trying to get real information and I'm not going to judge you. Like DM me if you don't want people to see your dumb choices. I mean, I don't care about them, but it's a dumb choice. And I'll tell you why, like face to face, but I'm not going to do it to you in front of millions of people. But it's just interesting how people guard their values at their convenience. And so the question is, are they really proud of those choices and those decisions? Are they? Or are they trying to convince you of something? Because I think it's an interesting psychology going on there.
Are you familiar with George Carlin?
Yeah.
There's this one joke that he makes that's like the American political consciousness, where one friend asked the other, who are you going to vote for and why? And the guy says, no, how dare you ask me such an intimate question? Well, anyway, so I was fucking my wife on missionary yesterday. And then they just get into talking about these very vulgar topics of intimate sex and all these different things. But we can't talk about who we're voting for, why, and all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my thing. what's the percent of the American people right now that even see the voting process itself as legitimate, that think our government is actually functioning for us? It's very, very low. I think most people that vote do so because they're middle class and they have no necessity to improve their lives, so they can sit here and worry about communist Kamala Harris or fascist Donald Trump. And at the end of the day, both of them are running solely on I'm not the other one.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, Trump had some potential at first, right? 2016's Trump was talking about locking up Hillary Clinton and draining the swamp and bringing production back. And I was sort of quietly optimistic, like, okay, let's see where this goes. But it went the same place it always does, right? Nowhere. And so I think we're in this period where more and more people are realizing that it's all a facade. It's all a mirage. It's all a distraction. And those who still care don't even really know why they care anymore. It's sort of just a habit, a routine. And as this process that I call reproletarianization, or the death of the middle classes, continues on, the same thing will be happening to them. That is, unless they're, safely ensconced in what tiny amount of a middle class we're going to have in the future. But they're going to realize at some point, the only reason I cared was because I'd cared in the past. That's what my prediction.
The liberals would shoot me for saying this, but Trump is another form of Obama. Someone who got the masses hyped up and who came up getting a lot of people hopeful for a radical change, and that just gave them a big old nothing burger when he was actually in office and just governed like everyone else before them. And, we went from a Trump that said, I'm going to be the anti-war president, to a Trump that says, let's bomb Iran and their nuclear facilities and basically escalate to a nuclearized third world war. Let's continue. I'm going to let Israel finish the job. What? 250,000 Palestinians dead, according to the Lancet report. It's absolutely disgusting. They're, as George Galloway is fond of saying, they're two cheeks of the same ass.
And this is something too that I want some of my friends to kind of debunk, or not demystifying their mind. They have to demystify this thought process. I always viewed Trump as just, he's a tool, obviously. He's simply a tool. And I've always seen him as a Democrat from day one. Like, he's always been a Democrat. Like, if you look at these people's histories, I don't know why people are so. If you look at fucking Marjorie Taylor Greene, Carrie Lake, Lauren Boebert, all these people were Democrats. It makes total sense to me, but these people are so delusional. How are these people? They're far right now. I'm like, no, they're not. They're using their positioning as a way to get in the system. That's all Trump is a tool. Like, he's nothing more than people. By them saying that they're scared of him, actually adds more to the problem. That's why I've tried to tell people, you're giving him more credit than what he needs, than what he deserves. Like, he's not this fucking like formidable force. I mean, you guys are making him that. Like, he's not some kind of a formidable force, but maybe I'm just on the other side of it. I don't know. But I just try to get people, like, maybe they just don't see what we see. But I just think that they've created the monster, and now they're trying to blame everybody else that have been telling you all along. The media, y'all did that shit yourselves. The Pied Piper strategy, you elevated him. You thought that he was going to self-destruct. It backfired on you. The personality got, blamed, went into the masses. The masses liked it. That flavor of the day, which was the different flavor, the same flavor of bullshit neoliberalism, but it was the neoliberalism that people were wanting.
Yep.
But and when you play those neoliberal games, you get burned by them, and that's exactly. I think Trump is pretty much part of that tradition.
Look, I I think people liked Trump because he took the mask off, right? The reason he began getting famous was in that discussion with Hillary Clinton, right? Here, where he's like, I know you don't pay taxes because I use the same loopholes. And everybody was like, he said the quiet power out loud. We all knew this. Finally, someone who's telling it like it is, right? And from that moment forward, people just trusted him, not remembering that, he's kind of a reality TV clown, right? And this is something that really made all my Trump voting coworkers think. Once he got in office, he governed pretty much like Obama.
Yeah.
It was almost the exact same. Nothing really.
He deported less people.
Oh yeah, there's that.
Talk about the immigration issue.
I don't know why they use that fucking like they obviously. I don't believe that they're trying to win. I don't believe that the Democrats, because they're going to win anyway, because all they do is play off of each other. Like I've been trying to tell my friends this: the Democrats and Republicans need each other. That's the only way this bullshit system can survive.
Just like the Zionists need the Nick Fuentes. That's exactly it. For the Democrats, stuff like abortion is a political football. They had time. If they actually believed in, in what they say they believe, they could have codified it 30 years ago. They didn't do it. The Republicans, do they actually care about immigration or any of the things that they talk about? Hell no. The people that fund the Republican Party are the ones that benefit from the cheap labor of non-legal immigrants. So both parties distract you from the bread and butter issues where they're both, excuse my French, fucking you equally wrong.
That's what my dad says, by the way.
and they focus on these single issues that even those issues they're disingenuous about because they don't actually believe in what they say they believe. They need both of those issues to remain as issues so that they can say, so that they can keep the boogeyman other as the person that's going to either take away abortion rights or allow immigrants to flood the border. If immigrants stop flooding the border, in the words of the Republicans, or if abortion is codified in the case of the Democrats, what the hell are they going to run on?
Look, here's my thing. A few years ago, or maybe it was a few months ago, there was a study from Princeton that said that it empirically proved that the USA has no democracy at all, that it has oligarchy. And this went viral, right? Because it resonated with people and what they already intuitively knew. And what Carlos is describing is what Lenin once said was that every 4 years, people in bourgeois society are allowed to choose who is going to exploit them and who is going to oppress them. And that's what it is. When is the last time the American people actually chose a candidate? We are constantly forced to go, oh, this person might be less bad. I believe we're in a period where less bad is no longer good enough, where people are catching on to this because they've relied on it for too long.
I want to get this in because Noah may have to go shortly, and then we can kind of, close it up some and talk a little bit more about just ACP just a little bit more before we close out today. I wanted to kind of bring up my literary background because it's kind of relevant into the discussion with Marxism, communism, and the way I was kind of introduced. I wasn't introduced to communism through the literature that I interpret and study, because even in high school, like I said, when I was a liberal, and even when I was going to college way back when, I was reading Marx back then. I was reading that stuff then. I didn't quite the ideas were like, this person's a very smart person. That's kind of what I got from it. I didn't really contextualize it the way I needed to at the time. And then when I got to the university, I started reading all these Black writers in Latin America. Aimé Césaire, whether it's a Francophone writer, Fanon, or whether it's somebody like Adalberto Ortiz, who was an Afro-Ecuadorian writer. And all these people at some point had elements of either they were characters of communism in their literature, confronting like a Black world, this Black localized world. And it was different in the Caribbean. It was different in the Southern Cone. It was different in South America, Central America, just depending on where these people were. And you're dealing with all these intersectional elements of the blackness and the geography and everything else. But the part that interested me the most is when these self-declared Marxists kind of they rediscovered themselves and kind of questioned their own literary productions, like a Jacques-Stéphane Alexis from Haiti, who wrote Mi Compadre General Sol, which is like General Son, my brother, if you translate that to English, even though it was written originally in French and Creole. And he's talking about people then, like the characters, are from like poverty, like abject poverty, black protagonists from abject poverty. And they don't know anything about communism. They don't know anything about it. The only way these characters are introduced to it is through they would be more bourgeois, I guess, but they're imprisoned because of their politics at the time. Like, and these are fictional writings, but these people are in prison because they're communists. So he's getting education from these communists that he meet in prison. This protagonist, for instance. But the whole novel and these series of novels kind of question this idea of blackness and relating that to communism, and how there's a friction there, because even though the ideas sound good, they always portray it as like these are ideas that you see in the books. These are ideas that you see in fantasy novels. How does that relate to my Haitianness, my blackness? And it kind of deals with this Haitian Revolution meets the French Revolution meets communism, is kind of questioning everything that we've been taught about these things. And I always wonder, where does Pan-Africanism fall into this? Because there's definitely a dialogue between all these different ideologies, but the way the black writers confront it is interesting to me, because it's not that they're shooting down communism completely. It's just that they always tend to go back to pre-communism, like the Middle Passage, or whether it was the formation of the quilombos in the 1500s. It's always like a very localized, like that's the only way we can do it. It has to be communal. It has to be super localized. It can't be something that's a broader type of ideology. I don't know if any of that makes sense or not, but I'm trying to capture what these people are writing and also my interpretation of what they're writing.
It does. Yeah. I'll be quick, Carlos. I think that having grown up in a mostly black neighborhood, there is a sort of narrative that communism is a white people thing. I mean, that's what I've straight up been told many times. But communism is a universal thing. And in the context of America, we call the father of American Marxism W.E.B. Du Bois, right? There is no American Marxism without understanding Du Bois and the Black freedom struggle. There's no American people without Black America, right? The Black America, the Black working class specifically, brings the entire nation forward, actualizing us further, developing us as a whole people, not just at one revolutionary moment, but two, right? At the end of the Civil War, which creates the first ever dictatorship of the proletariat in history. And then during the Civil Rights Movement, which is another revolutionary transition to smash and throw down Jim Crow. Go ahead, Carlos. I don't want to go up on a ramble.
No, yeah, that analysis that Noah is referring to, based on the work of Du Bois and our analysis of his role as the foundation of American Marxism, I develop it in the last book for those interested, Why We Need American Marxism. And it's very interesting because even in the academy, part of what you get in the people that are presented as radical is this conception that, Marxism is not radical enough. It's European, it's white, etc. And it couldn't be more the contrary. Russia was considered a white nation for most of its history. But do you know what the most white supremacist writers in the US and in the West in general said when Russia had the Bolshevik Revolution? They became black. They're no longer white. They're basically lost their white card. Yeah, you could go back to the writings of some of these racist, the white supremacist thinkers, and in their eyes, communism was identical with the negation of their conception of whiteness. That's why even here, when the McCarthyite period, what do they call, and there's pictures of this, of racist protesters, what did they call race mixing? They called race mixing communism, right? So the ideology of defending capitalism has always been intimately connected with the need to otherize some group, and as a reflection back from that otherization of positing some sense of whiteness as intimately connected to humanity. So I think that one of the things that we actually see de facto historically is that things like Pan-Africanism have always been developed within the context of not only a critique of communism, but an alignment with communism. And not only a critique of capitalism, but an alignment with communism. The person who develops Pan-Africanism is Du Bois, someone who dies while being a member of the Communist Party. The country he died at, Ghana, was a socialist country, allied with the Soviet Union. Most of the main anti-colonial revolutionaries, whether it's Cabral or Sankara, whoever it might be in Africa, they were deeply Pan-Africanist, Nkrumah. And they were communists, but communist in the national and civilizational context of African reality. And this just goes back to what we talked about in a previous interview, and that I referenced briefly in this one. Communism or socialism is always embedded in a specific form. And Pan-Africanism, in the way that it has been formulated, all it really is socialism with African characteristics. And that analysis is itself a Marxist analysis. And, what makes something Marxism, as to go back to a point that Noah made, is not people calling themselves that, right? Someone can call themselves a Marxist, but in their analysis of the world, they have nothing to do with Marxism. And then there's people that cannot call themselves Marxism, can just call what they're doing Pan-Africanism. But in reality, what they're doing is Marxism. And that's a whole lot of what we find in the anti-colonial revolutions in the global South and specifically in Africa. And that's why when they come together with the communists, it's like, holy shit, it's kind of the same thing, except that we developed it specifically out of our context. And in my opinion, that proves the correctness of communism. When people who are not trained necessarily on the literature of Marx, Engels, Lenin, etc., spontaneously arrive through their own very own realities and struggles at those ideas. So, in that context, whether you call it Pan-Africanism or communism, call it whatever you want. It is, for the people that are aware of the tradition, it is communism. So that's how I've always thought of that tradition. And in the U.S., it's essential because the main developments that our nation has had have been centered around the struggle against the color line, against racism. And this narrow conception that the social democrats have of class struggle as just this thing that happens in the factories between white workers and their bosses, that's ridiculous. In Marx, in Engels, and Lenin, the struggles for national liberations are not just national liberation struggles, they're a form that the class struggle takes. The struggle against slavery in the U.S. South was not just a struggle against slavery, it was a class struggle, the form that the class struggle takes. The struggle against apartheid in the context of the U.S. after the counter-revolution of 1876 and up until 1964, when you have that political revolution and the jure abolition of apartheid. That struggle is a class struggle. Just like in South Africa, the struggle against apartheid was a class struggle. What are we going to say, that Mandela was only someone who was engaged in race struggle? No, it was the form that the class struggle took in the context of apartheid, because that's what capital needed in order to succeed in its ends. It needed to have people divided, to have poor working class people divided and fighting each other over race. Marx calls racism the secret through which the capitalist class sustains its power. So when you fight against racism, this bifurcation, artificial bifurcation of working class people on the basis of race, what are you fighting if not the class struggle?
That's interesting. Okay.
I just want to add that, look, I can call myself a pizza. It doesn't make me a pizza, right? I have to actually be a pizza in reality. That reality is always primary, right? And our thoughts are only reflections of every moment leading up to that thought being cognized.
One pretty big philosophical thing that I wanted to get off my chest before we conclude with ACP, and Noah probably had to go soon, but I wanted to get in this before Noah left. So where do you all view like decentralization? This is a word that I've never heard this word used so much in the last probably 2 years. Whether it was a guest, people who study political economy, political theory. I hear this word decentralization been thrown around left and right from libertarians, from socialists, and I'm saying to myself, everyone's using the same word. So I want to ask you guys, like, what does Marx, what does he comment on decentralization, and does that play any part at all into Marxism at all? Like what is the line? Because I've always gotten the impression that was more anarchist, but I may be off on that though.
Well, here's the thing. Most people you'll hear talking about decentralization, either for or against it, don't have a realistic view of what it is. Because in order to actually have a decentralized anything, you must have a centralized system on another level. It has to be both. That it takes, say, a strong communist state to develop a decentralized system where businesses, small businesses, can flourish by popping up locally. At the same time, in order to create that strong centralized communist state, it must be built. In order to build up that centralization, it must be built from the locales up, from the ground up. So it takes, at the same time as it takes decentralization to create centralization, it takes centralization to create decentralization. And this is one of the things we mean by contradictions existing in reality already, right? That this is all a process of these things happening, right? Building it up in order to continue building it on another level. And most people think, like, I'm a libertarian. I just dogmatically want things decentralized because I think that's cool or just or whatever. They don't really have a concept of how to arrive there, right? Mm-hmm. What have libertarians ever actually done in the U.S.? About as much as make love.
Praise Javier Milei. I'm like, what the fuck, Javier Milei? Seriously?
I guess they've given the Argentine treasury to the Federal Reserve.
That's usually the approach that we take to most questions. The way we're taught to think is, again, separating stuff. Centralization here, and then this unbridgeable gulf, decentralization here. That doesn't make any sense, right? Even let's look at the word itself. Decentralization. What are you decentralizing from? A center. Mm-hmm. So decentralization already implies a center. And a center implies that which is not central, that which is decentralized. At the very level of even the linguistic dynamic of the terms, you can't separate it from the other because they only obtain their meaning through that other. And what we see in the reality of the construction of communist states, or even in the reality of a communist party, such as the one that we're in and that we're leaders for, is this understanding of the interdependency of decentralization and centralization. In order for one to function effectively, it needs the other to function effectively. If there's too much decentralization, not only does it affect the center, but it affects the decentralized. And if there's too much centralization, not only does it affect the decentralized, but also the center. There needs to be a sort of dialectical equilibrium where for the success of one, you need the success of the other. And I think that's what we've seen in communist states, that because they're centralized, they're also very much more decentralized, right? It is in people's China where you can go to your local communist officer if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing and pull them out and scream at them and have these, people's protest events that are actually meaningful in ways that you can't do it in the US. But it's because they have decentralization that it can also have a more effective decentralization. So again, it's about how is it that we're thinking about opposites as mutually exclusive or as interdependent. And our tradition sees them as interdependent. And I think even if you look at the words itself, it implies that interdependency.
Noah, I promise I'm going to let you go, but since you're here, I have to throw this nugget to the crowd because it's been brought to my attention, and I was there the day this happened, that someone that's been on my show a few times wants to debate you, but they said that they will only do that if I'm the moderator. And I said, you know what? I wasn't even going to bring this up, but I believe that I would never entice this out there, first of all, because I've said that I've never seen a successful debate before. The thing about my show is that I want people to get something from it. I don't want to be like a shooting match. I want people to actually grow from the experience. I believe I could do that. I believe that I'm capable of pulling something like that off as a moderator, because I'm really impartial. I don't have any agenda at stake. I have nothing at stake when it comes to this. And so I'm all about fairness, giving people the opportunity to debate, dialogue, converse with each other. But someone is wanting to debate you about, I don't know exactly what the premise would be. I think you said something about I'll debate any leftist or something like that. You put it on your X profile. And then Zach from the show, Zach Hyden, the Matt Redneck, someone who's been on my show before, said, I'll debate you. Like Kiko moderates it. And so I said, I have to talk to Noah about it. I said, you got to give me time for this shit, man. Like, honestly, because I've never done something like this before. I'm not a big fan of this, honestly. I kind of have my hesitation. But I said, if we did it, it had to be in January or something. I had to think about it. But I want to see what you feel or where you stand on that anyway before we continue.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think I know what you're talking about. And I made a comment about how I have all of these fake leftists like constantly gibbering at me on X, constantly like making wild claims and never. And I say, hey, I have a call-in show I do every Monday. Just call in. Let's talk about it. Right? If you actually have something, then you should be able to explain why it's correct. And we can go back and forth, right? And not a single one has actually done that. No, I take that back. One time I had Carlos on as a guest, and someone tried to do that, and Carlos was like, oh, I'm taking this one. So I never got a chance. He cut me off on my own
That's
show.
Hilarious.
What are you gonna do?
No, but see,
he's a lot smarter than me, so it's fine, right? So like, I jokingly call him like the Lenin to my Stalin, right? But anyway, no, for real, like I'd be happy to do that. The problem is, and I've had a few people approach me with offers like this, so I think I know who you're talking about. But the problem is, I am insanely busy. Like I'm going to be all over the country, if not in other countries, for the party. I have conferences, I have regular party work, I have writing, I have my like I have a lot going on. So I try to filter everybody. Like, look, if you have something to say, call my show, and I dedicate those hours every week. That's where I carve out a time to answer people's questions, no matter what they are. But if he wants something like more official and like, I don't know, I've never even done that, but I'm happy to if that's what he wants to do. If you want to do that, I like you, so I'm happy to like come back on the show just for that. So yeah, like it might be hard scheduling for me. So fair warning.
No problem. We'll do it based on your availability because he's a stay-at-home dad, so he's going to have the time and availability. So
Cool.
We'll work it around your schedule. And
That
I
might
think the
make
reason
it
why
a lot
Zach,
easier, actually.
I think the reason why Zach brought this up, honestly, is because he wanted it to go somewhere, and I think he felt like this may be the vehicle to where that could go somewhere. And that's the only reason why I would agree to do something like that. I told him, I was like, I'm going to have some time to think about this because I mean, it's just something that I'm really not a big fan of, but it's a good way to kind of make me, you know, stand up, do something, and confront something because you're going to have to confront different things in this type of organizational capacity. So uh, I've thought about it enough, and I feel more comfortable now just knowing you guys and knowing him. You guys are good people. All you guys are good people. I think we could work it out.
Look, the way I see it, all you need is good people. It no matter where you come from, what tradition, what dogmas, what anything. If you have good people putting their heads together, then you can get something accomplished.
I agree with that. I believe in that for sure. But I don't know if you have to go now. No, I had to get that in before you got off camera because I know you got places to go. But
I got about 15 minutes before like I have to leave. So
oh, we're good then. We'll all get off at the same time then. Okay, so ACP, you mentioned Haas, Jackson Hinkle. I've seen these people like on. I only know them through social media. So how do you all have a relationship anyway, and how did all this come to ACP? Like, who's in it? How many? What's the enrollment looking like? All that stuff.
The other part that came together to form the party, very similar to the Midwestern Marx Institute and what drove Eddie and I to create that outlet, had some critiques about the existing left, and it just so happened that a lot of the critiques were very, very similar. There's concepts that we have developed that they, when we introduced it to them, they're like, "Oh my God, this is like the same thing we were also saying, but with a different term or something." So there's, oh, okay. So there's the two groups were groups that developed in similar ways. Some areas there's differences. For instance, Infrared and Haas had more of a debate culture going. They grow out of the Twitch streaming platforms, but in terms of critiques of the left and how they visualized their project, it was quite homologous to ours. And this activity that we had going on within the Communist Party, the old one, where we were trying to change it democratically, we realized, quite quickly that it was both of us trying to change it democratically, and that we had agreements about how it had to be changed and towards what. So that was the locus for a point of unity. And once we saw that it was impossible through the existing means to do that, it naturally occurred for on the basis of the base of the party to reconstitute it, and it was basically reconstituted on the basis of these two organizations that were the ones that brought people into the party. The other important component of the party is Christopher Halali, who is the international secretary of the other party of communists that basically 80% of it, or so I've heard, leaves to join our party. He is, and I kid you not, the most impressive individual I think I've ever met in my life. Someone who's been at war, who's led a squadron of 40 men to war, who has 6 master's degrees, one of them in China, who's finishing a Juris Doctor and a doctorate in international relations in the most prestigious Russian university, who's traveled the whole world and who knows some of the most impressive people ever, who's been able to connect our party to more than 60 communist parties from around the world within like the first day he joined us, and who is currently running for office while he's doing all of this, speaks like 8 languages. So it's literally like an unbelievable individual. He's been to like 2 Ivy League schools. So he comes in.
Let me interrupt real quick. Not only that, Chris is also the friendliest person you will ever meet. When he's in the room, you cannot help but be in a good mood.
Yep.
Like he gets everybody like ready to work.
So those are the sort of 3 component parts of what forms the ACP. We launched on the day that Biden dropped out of the race.
Oh, okay.
I know Noah and I still remember very very clearly the debates that we were having. Should we wait? Is our news of the launch going to be overshadowed by Biden? And it was a real debate, and I'm happy to have been on the side that thought that we can ride this wave of Biden. And to all of our surprise, we were hoping for 250,000 views. To all of our surprise, the day that we launched, we completely eclipsed the Biden news. We became the most trending thing on Twitter for the next 5 days.
Wow.
I was in Venezuela.
Congratulations.
On an official invitation by the government as soon as we launched in Chicago. And I was in Venezuela, on day 3, and we were still the most trending thing on Twitter. And it became replaced only by the Venezuelan elections, which we got to trend on Twitter. So even from the inception, we were able to show indeed that it's a qualitatively different type of party than anything the left, I think, has been used to, not just in social media, but in terms of the international relations. They far surpass all of the other self-proclaimed socialist organizations. In terms of community work, I mean, our people have been able to change a lot of their communities. They've made great connections with organizations on the grounds, with churches and other groups that serve communities. For Hurricane Helene, we raised more than $10,000 to help, and we were on the ground while the U.S. government was preventing people from helping. Our people were in there helping and giving supplies and aiding their communities. What we've done just in the last 3 months has been incredible, and it's just a fraction of everything else that we have planned to do.
Yeah, it's been wild. Everything that we expected, we tried to temper our expectations. We know that there are I mean the history of the left wing in America is the history of the FBI. It's a history of McCarthyism. It's a history of infiltration and COINTELPRO. And we can't kid ourselves that those forces just went away when the Soviets fell. They did not. So we knew we would be attacked right off the bat. But everything we've done so far has surpassed our wildest expectations. The 200,000 views thing, we eclipsed that like immediately. It got up to 2 million. And this is because we think that people are ready for something new, for a change, for something that genuinely, that I think we have this issue of all the self-proclaimed leftist organizations. They create a community of their own of like-minded individuals from scratch. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. This is a product of the hyper-alienation of 21st century bourgeois society, right? But what they do once they create those is they come into other communities from outside as this alien creature and say, we are going to teach you. We are the good ones. Come support us. And we don't do that, right? We say, look, we live next door. We're in the PTA with you, right? We're in the church with you. We're already here. We're communists, and we're the ones actively trying and succeeding in making this community a better place. And in this, we're starting in this decentralized bottom-up mode, right? That comes together overall as one big thing, as a centralized Communist Party project, right? And we think that establishing these relations organically disproves all of the misinformation and falsification about communism in this country. Because here's the thing, and this is what I've been doing at work forever, right? Everyone in work knows I'm a communist, right? They also know that I'm the guy that they can call if they have a problem with their project, that I will stop I'll get my guys going, stop what I'm doing and come help them fix their project. If they have a guy call off, I'm the guy that comes and fills in. And I'm the last guy that will call up and shirk my duty and put it onto someone else and give them something extra to do. And that is the image we need, because those are the only people we take in the party, the people that are that dedicated to helping. And that is organically what people are already seeing. Forget the internet, right? That's what people see in their daily lives.
And is every person associated with the Midwestern Marx Institute in the ACP?
In terms of like the faces of the institute, yeah, we have myself. I'm in the highest leadership body of the ACP as the Secretary of Education. Noah is what's the official title?
I'm the Secretary of the Treasury or Director of the
Secretary of the
Treasury.
Professor Danny Shaw, who's Director of International Department at the Institute, he is in the Politburo as an official deputy to Christopher Halali, whom I was talking about just a second ago. Eddie is in the executive board as well, so the top leadership of the party. And Kyle, who's the chief labor analyst of the Institute, he's the director of personnel, which is within the executive board as well. He's the person that does the interviews, goes around the country, checking in on chapters and stuff like that.
Also, you may have seen Bridget's podcast that we do.
Yeah.
That probably canceled. She's in the political bureau as well. So sort of, you see me, Eddie, Carlos, Kyle, we're in the executive board, and then others are in the political bureau.
And I've seen a lot of these people on social media because I've been following this pretty closely. Not at the beginning, but like this last week, 2 weeks especially, I've been seeing all these pictures coming in, just like I was watching some of Eddie's speech that he gave. I feel like I know Eddie and Danny because I know that Danny follows the forum very closely because I just know that he follows on there because he's one of my public subscribers on there. So I saw his name pop up, Professor Danny Shaw. Shout out to Danny. And it's messed up. I think they released him from John Jay, didn't they?
Yeah. Yeah. He got fired for speaking out against the genocide.
Yeah.
He got interrogated. He went for a whole month to 12 countries in Europe and Southeast Asia to do, anti-genocide work. And when he got back, he got interrogated for 5 hours. He had all of his electronic devices taken and copied, and he's kept on fighting. So that's the sort of spirit of individual that we seek to have in the party, especially in leadership.
Yeah, and something that we won't get into this is the suppression is also a real thing. And I think that the people who say that it's kind of feigned and exaggerated, they say that because they're not affected by it, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess because you're kissing enough ass, I guess you're not affected by it. But the dissident voices are definitely being affected by this media suppression. And I'm not, like I said, this person, between me and this person, we have respect for each other. But I was a little surprised that a guest reached out to me and was basically, we were trying to do another interview together. And they were like, Kiko, I just noticed like your views are becoming like more and more like low. And I'm like, you do realize that my channel has probably been shadow banned like a lot of smaller independent media channels because I've done some that people I bring on and I can go from 2,300 views on a video and I can bring the same person on and it's 1,000 views less and then it's 500 views less. I mean, you can see it happen in real time. Like it happens.
We had Garland Nixon on like 2 months ago. He got like almost 10K. And then we had him on a month after that, and it got 2. Same individual, same sort of promoting, similar thumbnail, right? And it's we're getting throttled. All of us are getting throttled. I mean, it makes no sense. Our YouTube, we have 51,000 subscribers. Our average live stream can go anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5, 3. It's like that's a very, very small percentage of the subscribers that we have. What's the point of subscribing if you don't see the videos of the people that you're subscribed to? If only a very, very small percentage is going to see the video, like what? And then there's other people whom I have never even seen before, like the Majority Report. I don't think I've ever seen a video from the Majority Report.
Oh, Sam Cedar?
Oh my God. And it gets recommended left and right to us, or Vouch, or all these other people who we have never clicked on a video to watch, but the algorithm just pumps us with it all the goddamn time.
No, but something you said there about, gosh, what were you saying before Majority Report? I was going to comment.
Yeah, the ratio of like views to subscribers.
Yeah, that's definitely a game in play. I know what it was. The 2000 though, honestly, that's a significant number. That's a significant. That's like honestly, that would be a badge of honor. Because and I say that because they must be seeing the threat to that. Like that 2000 number is really bigger than 2000 if you think about it. Because just imagine the other people who are sharing that content. The 2000 is really 5,000. You know who's to tell like the real number? It's I think that scares them that they can't measure the impact that you're having, even though you're just one channel. But if you take a lot of Midwestern Marx institutes, you start to accumulate after a while. You have a lot of power there.
Look, there's a reason that they've kicked Jackson off of every platform except for X.
They have?
Yep. Every single one he's been banned from except for X.
So he doesn't have to dive anymore?
Even dating sites.
He doesn't have to dive anymore?
Oh, he has it on Rumble. So the new free speech platforms.
Gotcha.
And on X.
Yeah, oh yeah, Rumble is very yeah. And by the way, their coffee is really good. Just saying. I had
That's the 1775 coffee.
Yeah, I think it was called free speech something.
Weird advertisement.
Yeah, it's very weird.
It's
but
good,
it's got a little Rumble logo on it. The other coffee I really like is like a similar framing. It's like the official ACP coffee now. It's the Black Rifle Coffee Company. It's like this coffee by veterans, and it's the best coffee I've ever had in my life. If you guys are watching,
it's good. Yeah, I've had it.
Like I drink coffee and we can work something out. I'm just saying.
Have you seen the 1775, the Rumble one? It tries to feed into like masculinity, but it does it too explicitly. Right? And the thing about masculinity is that you just do it. You don't have to talk about doing it. You just do it. But it's like, this is coffee for real men. It's like, oh, are you hiding something? What's going on there? That's not how.
One of the guys I worked with, he's like one of those guys that like got really into watching Glenn Beck and all that kind of stuff. Really silly dude. But I walk into the cabinet. We have different. I walk into one of the shops at work, right? And he's just sitting there with another guy. He goes, "Yep, couple of alpha males hanging out," and I'm like, I don't know if the actual alpha males have to announce it as I walk in the room, bud.
Yeah, you make a good point there. But beautiful people, I think this is the time. We're almost 2.5 hours in. Beautiful conversation. I enjoyed every second of it. I just do want to give you all a second to speak directly to my audience if they have a question or a comment directed to you, whether it's you, Carlos, or anyone else within the Institute. What would be the quickest way to get in touch with you all?
The email would be good, midwesternmarx@gmail.com for any questions. I also want to shamelessly plug, I'm going to be doing a class on Marxism-Leninism that starts November 7th and runs till the end of the year. It's part 1 of a 2-part class on Marxism-Leninism. Part 2 is going to be from January to February. In general, we're going to be doing classes all the time, and I'm spearheading that effort alongside Noah, who does the basics of Marxism class every once in a while. I recommend that people check out my recent book, Why We Need American Marxism, which can be found at midwesternmarx.com/books. I would like to think that I challenged the dominant narrative about what America is and what its relationship to socialist and radical struggles is. And I definitely recommend everyone pick up the recent issue of the Journal of American Socialist Studies. Again, Midwestern Marx prices, so the scholarly level of the academy, but 1/10 of academy prices. That's the best way to support us, either through classes or buying our books or becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. But those that are interested and think they have the discipline and time to participate in some of the organizing work that we're doing, I definitely would recommend that they check out the ACP. at acp.us, which is the official website. You can find our party constitution there, as well as the party program, which was just ratified at our first national convention in Chicago this past October 12th.
I'm going to reiterate, if you're interested, get a seat in Carlos's class sooner rather than later. We're talking about one of the best teachers I've ever met in my life. There's a reason he's the director of education for the party. And if you have like any questions at all, every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern, we do my call-in show. It's Noah's show. I know I'm not very creative at naming things, so there you go. And you can find me there every Monday. It's right down there at Khrachvik on X. It's advertised all over. So yeah, hit us up. And that's about it.
Well, I know for a fact that some of the people in my audience have definitely taken some of your coursework and they appreciate it. I know I've purchased books before. I think I've donated to Noah's class, just like you could send somewhere to donate and stuff. I always try to help when I can, but I'm really happy that we had this conversation today and that we will continue to have future conversations because we need independent media. Independent media is so important. And I know people like to use that word a lot, independent media, but I truly believe that we're on the cusp of something great. You guys do great work. We're trying to do great work here. And I think if we'd just been honest in our principles, we can get somewhere. I just don't take the bait with all this. Be driven by something, that's going to take people with you. And I like the price aspect, the price points you can't beat. I like it that they're pretty uniform. When you visit Midwestern Marx Institute, you go to their catalog and they're affordable, and hopefully it goes to them 100%. Does most of that go to you all?
For the books, a decent chunk of it, we want to keep the prices as low as possible. And the problem is that we use a third-party printer and distributor. So they take the lion's share of it, but I think we get like $2 or $3 for every book sale, and we have never wanted to go above that because it means raising prices. But yeah, it's we're trying to sell to regular working people who don't have $125 to pay for a book, which is what most academic publishers, when a book just comes out, what they sell it for, $120, $130, and a lot of the people that are publishing our books are academics. They have the degrees. It's academic level work, but priced at the rate that regular working people can afford.
You gentlemen, again, I can't thank you enough for coming on to the show. And beautiful people, subscribe to their YouTube channel. I'm on there all the time, just in the shadows, like I said. And I'm going to put all the information in the episode description. I'm going to get this episode out tonight so we can all watch it tonight and enjoy the rest of your day. We got some beautiful guests coming on down the road. We have Jack Rasmus, Elsa Campton coming up this Sunday, talk about the BRIC Summit that just happened in Kazan, Russia, 16th BRIC Summit. And we have the election night coverage on November 5th. And we got some surprise people coming on here and there. So I guess you have to stay tuned to the show, Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum, to find out who's going to be on here. But enjoy your day and cheers, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us on, brother.